Aaron, I appreciate
Yes,
you calling me. That's good insight.
Thank you.
Good to hear from you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, we got to
Mr.
take a break. When we come back, we'll have author Sam Hayes with us on a special Martin Luther King Day tribute. This is Tony Barnhart sitting in for Paul Finebaum. This is the Paul Finebaum Show. Southeastern Conference. These kind of pioneer stories really exist throughout the Southeastern Conference. And at Auburn, it was Henry Harris. Henry Harris, the book is Remember Henry Harris, the Lost Icon of a Revolution, that has just been re-released. And here to help us talk about it is the author of Remember Henry Harris, an old colleague of mine at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Please welcome Sam Hayes. Sam, it's Tony Barnhart. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on the show very much. It's an honor to be able to talk about Henry Harris.
Well, tell us a little bit about the story. It begins, if I remember your book correctly, it begins around 1968. And how did it come on your radar screen?
Well, in 1968, that's when Henry signed with Auburn, and he was. I saw him some play in college, and was impressed with him. He was only black freshman playing basketball on the freshman teams back then. Freshmen couldn't play varsity. He was the only one in the SEC, and was very impressive in the way he played. Very, very athletic. And then I was working the sports editor in Columbus, Georgia, in 1974, when, as you remember those days when we had wire machines, teletypes, and you were checking late at night for the second edition to see if there was any more news to cram in the paper, and I ripped his story off the wire, and I can still remember, very vividly where I was, and I read that he'd killed himself. And that made a tremendous impression on me at that time. Columbus is right there by Auburn. I was living in Lee County, Alabama, which is the county Auburn was in. And my first impression was this isn't going so well. And because I'd really been supportive of integration, as there were a lot of people were of integration in the SEC at that time. But there were a lot of people that were opposed to it, and they were the ones that made the most noise, of course. So that made me interested in his story from the start. I got to do some reporting on it when I was later on in the early 80s. And but it's always been a book I've wanted to write, and we finally got it. We were able to get it published at the end of last year, and we kind of released it today with it being Martin Luther King Day, because he was clearly impacted by Dr. King and his work in Greene County, Alabama. And it's often not realized or recognized, but the integration of the SEC and other Southern schools was part of the civil rights movement. It was in the latter stages of the civil rights movement, but it was very much a part of it, because the college athletics had become part of the resistance. The schools were integrated, but then the athletic teams weren't, and the black students that were the early black students at the major Southern universities didn't really feel like they were a part of the university until they had black athletes. On the public face of the university, the athletic teams that were the public face, they had been kept off those teams.
Sam, in your reporting, when you dig into this and dig into the background, what did you learn about his time at Auburn and how that had gone for him? Because as you point out, he goes in 1968, and by 1974, he's gone. He's taken his own life. What did you learn about that whole time period?
Well, first, he was really early. I mean, his significance as a pioneer figure is that he was the first black athlete to sign a scholarship at any of the SEC's Deep South schools. The only schools that there were 10 schools then, of course, and the only ones that had integrated up till '68 were Vanderbilt, Tennessee, and Kentucky.
Right.
And they had integrated, that they had started in '66, so 2 full years had gone by, and none of the Deep South, the 7 quote Deep South schools, had signed any black athletes, and that was of course where the resistance was the greatest. And so you wondered, it was made a big deal when Auburn did sign him, and because you kind of wondered if anybody ever would. And he represented really a paradigm shift. He's the first one he enters in '68, and then within the following year, Georgia and Alabama both integrate in basketball, and Florida and Mississippi State integrate in football, and then within another year, LSU and Ole Miss integrate in basketball. So within 2 years' time, after Auburn signs him, it's like, all right, we're going to go on and do this. And then Auburn should feel very good about that. They were out front in doing that. What you're looking at with the difficulty he had was just a tremendous culture shock. Henry was the valedictorian of Greene County Training School. Greene County was an extremely poor county, 6th poorest county in America at that time. It was predominantly African American, 84% African American. So the small community of Bowling he lived in was predominantly black. He was valedictorian of Greene County Training School, and he goes to Auburn, and suddenly he's thrown in this white culture, and very few blacks on campus. I think there were 2 black females that entered when he did, fewer than 50, and most of them were commuters. They weren't in dorms. He moves into a dorm, Sewell Hall, the athletic dormitory at that time, 150 white athletes in there, and Henry Harris became friends with the custodians. Basketball players, the ones that were of his generation, the ones that were his age, they liked him. He was extremely, he's a very friendly guy, smiling. But quickly became a crowd favorite. They really liked him, but it was a struggle off the court. And he would go to across the tracks, which was the black area of Auburn, for his social life. And there were still, there was plenty of, he ran into hostility on campus, which would have been true for any athlete at any of these Deep South schools. And the others had very similar experiences. One of the things we try to do in the book to kind of let us know, because he wasn't around to tell, he's not around to tell us, that we got a lot in there about the other athletes and what was going on with them, and there was a lot of similarity. One of the things that Henry was clearly would have been a NBA player, but he got a really bad injury, and knee injury, and at Alabama, when in a game at Alabama, and when he was a junior, he was still the only black player on the court at that time. Wendell Hudson was hurt. He was Alabama's first, and he got hurt and played 2 nights later at LSU, at least for about 10 minutes, and then started the final 4 games. And they kept saying the coach kept saying that it was only he had a ligament, he had torn his cartilage, but he actually had torn his ACL ligament and his MCL ligament and the cartilage. And he played the rest of the season, and in tremendous pain, but that was how tough he was. And that was sort of, I think it's indicative of the pressure that these first athletes felt to prove themselves. They were there to blow up stereotypes. And there were, as you recall, there were a lot of them about black athletes. at that time, as silly as they would seem now, but they, that they wouldn't, or they would quit when the going got tough, or they wouldn't play hurt. Well, Henry Harris played hurt. He played. He just played and played, and then he played the whole next year. Should have been redshirted because the knee didn't heal, and he played, and about 70%, they said, but he's still the the leader on the team. He was unanimously elected captain, and then he goes after his last game. He comes out of his last game at home, and he gets an ovation for 90 seconds, and he is. Many of those people had never, at that time in the South, had never cheered for a black person, never had the opportunities before, certainly hadn't been able to do that for their university. And so he was well loved, but after he kills himself, he's been forgotten since then. There's no memory of him on campus anywhere. And that's not just at Auburn. That's only 2 or 3, 4 schools have really done something for their black athletes, and it's important history. These guys sacrificed. It was as James Owens, the first black athlete, a football player at Auburn, said, it was not the time for the black athlete to shine. We were there to break the fans in. And Henry, after he left, he was at the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee. He lost the chance to get a degree there when there was a coaching change. He was working as an assistant coach, and he also had lost his opportunity at Auburn. He lost his scholarship at Auburn after he got out and failed to make it in the NBA.
All right, the book is Remember Henry Harris, and thanks to you, Sam, a lot of people are going to remember Henry Harris. It's just now in release. And Sam, it's been really good talking with you, and congratulations on the book.
All right. So thank you for remembering him today. Thank you very much.
All right, Sam Hayes, old AJC colleague. All right, we've got to take a break. When we come back, we're here to take your calls at 855-242-7285. This is Tony Barnhart sitting in for Paul Finebaum. This is the Paul Finebaum Show.